Hello and welcome back to Through the Big Book with Dr. Ben. My name's Ben and I'm an alcoholic. So this is the third part of We Agnostics. We're on page 48 on the first whole paragraph. So let's dive right in here. It says, the reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they're firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories. For example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it's impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there's good evidence but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It's being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. That's a pretty cool one right there. To illustrate the prosaic steel girder, so that is an I-beam. That's basically that's an I-beam. You know, like I'm not an architect or an engineer, but the I-shaped beams that basically hold up buildings. Super strong structure. Currently, still, I would, I'm assuming, because I see them using in the skyscrapers and stuff here. But back then in the 30s, this was like, they were the symbol of the strongest, most firm, solid thing you could imagine. And it says that it's a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and in life as we see it, there's an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. So back to the I-beam. They're saying that even though it seems like the most solid thing in the world, it's really just a bunch of electrons, which, it's not as sturdy and strong as we may imagine it to be. And then here, it's saying that they're trying to say that they're trying to show that visual proof is not that big of a deal here. Yeah. So it says, we read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We've learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought for ourselves. Okay, so that's a big one. A lot of us come in here with a lot of prejudice or otherwise against organized religion. Maybe you're in one, maybe you're indifferent. Doesn't matter. But what they're saying here is just absolutely encouraging you to just not be prejudiced towards it, because it's working for a lot of people, And whether or not you think it works or it is or isn't going to work for you, it's not really very important. again, because we need to try something different. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting what we got and wind up in the spot that we're in, right? So I'm definitely not trying to push you to be religious, but at least, if nothing else, lay aside your prejudice against it. That's what we're saying here. Yeah. Okay, so it says, instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. So that's like, well, I used to go to church camp, but, a couple of the guys were, they were cussing a lot and they were stealing things and this and that. Therefore, all people who go to church are thieves. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's crazy. Or that because, the preacher or something or the priest from this place had this one offense. Or maybe there's several of them that had this offense out of millions, But nonetheless, we're focusing on those individuals and throwing the whole thing away because of the offenses of a few, right? But nonetheless, before I move on, everybody falls short. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. If you're talking about, people in religion or people in AA, they are absolutely held to a higher standard, much like judges or a physician or a pilot. You want your pilot to know what he's doing. You want him to be trained, and you don't want him to make a bunch of mistakes. Well, I've only crashed, 6 times. You're like, whoa, man, that's crazy. So sure, these people are held to a higher standard, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that all pilots are bad or all whatever because they made a mistake. People are going to be people. So here it says, we talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. Called out. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Man, that was so me for so long. Anyways, and if that's you, then here you are. So it says, in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. These are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. It says, here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of thinking and living. And by worldly, to me, that just means regular people, like you and I, that are saying this stuff. They don't have to, have a DD or doctorate in divinity or whatever and be a huge preacher or whatever to be saying these things. I've got a good buddy who, has a bunch of like prison face tats and all that stuff, and is very intimidating looking guy, and to hear him, drop a bunch of F-bombs and talk about, some of his stories, and then talk about, being saved by the grace of God and loving God and all this stuff, all in the same sentence is really beautiful. It's really incredible. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. I mean, that's where we're talking about the power. This power, lack of power, that was our dilemma, right? So they're kind of hinting at a third step here. When we do this decision, When we make this decision, which is a third step, we have this power, this newfound power flow into us. Really hard to explain. But it says, once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. This is so beautiful. It says, when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Tough to argue with that. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the spirit, the realm of the spirit, as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? So what I'm getting out of this right now is that a long time ago, I guess in the not-so-distant past and prior to that, men and women were consumed by, they thought about the realm of the spirit a lot more. They were more focused on that. There were many, societies, if you will, or people that might have plural gods, or all kinds of different things. And they wouldn't never have imagined of planes flying around in the air, big mechanical objects flying in the air. And then here in a minute, we'll talk about spaceships flying to the moon. This book was written before we had lunar flight, which is pretty remarkable. Now, and as I sit here, I'm in Toronto today, in 2023. There are companies that are shooting, aircraft to do space tourism. There's spacecrafts that have shot all over the place into space. I mean, it's just normal now. Nobody bats an eye when they hear about spaceships shooting out into space and stuff, or the internet. Imagine telling somebody from 1,000 years ago about the internet. That's about. And it's the flip of, things have flipped where people don't think as much about the spirit and more about the realm of the material is what they're saying here. All right. Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved that man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, "I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either." That's what I was referring to. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? Okay, so now this paragraph is what is called the bedevilment paragraph, or with the bedevilment assignment in it. So it says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. So, you can turn these into questions. So it says, we were having trouble with personal relationships. Or you could say, was I? Am I? Am I currently? Am I having trouble with personal relationships? Can I control my emotional nature? Am I prey to misery and depression? Am I having trouble making a living? Do I have a feeling of uselessness? Do I feel full of fear? Am I unhappy? Does it seem like I can't be of real help to other people? That's the bedevilment assignment. What I was taught to do is to write these down. And, of course, you don't have to have all of these things, but most of us have some, if not most of them. And it says, was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. So this is kind of funny. So bedevilment, by the way, means to torment, badger, and harass mercilessly and to plague. So bedevilment is a very horrible, horrible thing. So after all that, it's like, screw the moon. What about my bedevilments? Pretty funny. It says, when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. So what they're saying here is that our self-will, up to this point, no matter how awesome of stuff that we can achieve with lunar flight, blah, 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 how is it that we can achieve all these things but not be able to handle our personal relationships, our emotional natures, and all this other stuff, and being full of fear? That's why this is how they're starting to chip away at this agnostic temperament and make an argument in the case for a higher power, right? So it says the Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems because it can solve almost, most other problems, right? When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who insisted the Wrights would never fly. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It's not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That's one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined will not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. So they're not saying just throw out all logic. Logic, keep your logic. Just on these areas where you're not able to accomplish these things on your own, maybe that's where we could start to consider using a higher power, or the source, or all that stuff, God, however you want to call it. Hence, we're at pains to tell you why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. That's a really long sentence, but to me it's kind of all or nothing. So when it says, when we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? So this is where I encourage you to answer that question on your own. That is he? Is God or is he not? That's step 2. And when you can say yes, you just keep moving forward. If you say no, I may encourage you to either review what we've done so far, or just keep moving on, and maybe you'll change your mind. It says, arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we'd been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we didn't like to lose our support. So they've got bridge of reason and then reason capitalized a couple times here because they're telling us that we're worshiping reason, that is our higher power, and since higher power essentially would have a name here of God, whatever, it's going to be capitalized, and so that's why that's why those are capitalized. It says that was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. Yeah, you guys will probably see in my big book here, Josh, my sponsor, pointed this out. He says, you had faith in yourself up to this point, and here we are. Come on, man. Anyways, so moving on, it says, we found too that we'd been worshipers. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. He's talking about goosebumps there. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? You got to stop and ask yourself that. Maybe you're an athlete person, In my time, it was Michael Jordan, without a doubt. Michael Jordan and some other athletes, from Oklahoma City. We had a point guard there that we loved, Some other people, maybe you're an athlete person. Maybe you're a celebrity. You're into celebrities. You like to watch, movie people or TikTok stars or whatever. Maybe that's your thing. Money. What about money? Oof. Things. Maybe you worship a car or a house or your jewelry, something along those lines, or your card set or your rock collection. I don't know. Whatever it is. It says, and then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea or a flower? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much of these loves, these feelings, these worships have to do with pure reason? So, do you love something? Do you love somebody? Do you love one of your parents or both your parents if you're lucky to have both? Do you love your spouse? Do you love your children? Why? I love playing drums. Why do I love playing drums? I don't know. I just do. Why do I love my mom? Why does she love me? I don't know. Again, I just do. So you can see that there's nothing logical necessarily about love, but yet it's the most powerful thing that we can experience, right? It says it has little or nothing to do with pure reason. We saw it last. And then check this out. This is great. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Ooh. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we'd been living by faith and little else. Pretty incredible, right? That's a strong argument there. And if that's still not making sense to you, again, I encourage you to ask a sponsor in your local area to just talk to somebody else in your AA meeting, and of course you can always email me, and I'm happy to open up on any of this stuff that we're talking about. I'm trying to unpack as much as I can while still being expedient and getting us through all the content. So it says, imagine life without faith. Without faith, were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove in the sense that you can prove a straight line as the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say that the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said. Shout out to all my fellow scientists who've taken a bunch of chemistry. We know there is a lot going on with electrons. My goodness, I studied electrons for 3 years. Anyway, hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. And they said, God made these things possible. We only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but we liked to tell ourselves it wasn't so. Oh, I love this paragraph. It says, actually, we were fooling ourselves. For deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it's there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. This is just, I don't even know where to go on this. It's almost like this stuff's just programmed into us. You know, most of the people that I've found that hold on to their agnosticism or atheism comes from a position of defiance and ego. They feel like they have contempt for something, and they're afraid to let go and absolve into something that could be beautiful because they don't have sure footing on it. They're just too scared to give it a shot. And that's my experience. I reserve my right to be very wrong about that, but that's my perspective. It says, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. It was so with us. Now, I like this. I like that it's saying that the great reality is deep down within us. So I don't have to go down the street to a certain church, or I don't have to drive to, I like water. I don't have to drive to the lake. Lake Hefner in Oklahoma City is where I used to go all the time. Or, the sea when I was in Antigua. I don't have to do that. God is always within me. I can always tap into this spirit within me at all times, and so can you. It doesn't matter where you're at right now, where you're listening to this. If you're on the moon, if you're underwater, or you got some fancy, headphones inside of your snorkel or your scuba diving gear, or you're in prison, or you're in the car on the way home, or you're sitting down at the desk, or you're at the gym, it doesn't matter. God's always within us right now, in this moment, the presence of right now. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, not an hour from now, not 10 minutes ago, but right now. God is with you right now, inside, at all times. And then it says in the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. I told you, on the last episode, I told you how I find myself, I fancy myself to be part of the educational variety of spiritual seekers, because it's just taken me a really long time to find my way in here. And it says here again, it says the last analysis, that's where he's found. That's kind of seems to be the case for me. It wasn't always super accessible for me to just tap into this higher power thing and for me to know what to look for. I've been doing it for a while now, and so I'm a little more aware of, what I'm saying? You just get better at these things. But the point here is just to try, to have the willingness and to give it a shot. There's so many different books that can help you develop this skill further. So search them out. If you want examples, again, email me. There's an endless amount. Go to the library, and you will be overwhelmed by the variety of books to help you out with that. It says we can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice and enables you to think honestly and encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. Again, seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. You can't screw this up if you just try. You just can't. You just gotta go for it. You gotta do it. It says in this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school, where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration. Business failure, insanity, fatal illness, and suicide, these calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. Easy to see why. So one night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who'd known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge arose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." A gorge is an antiquated or a very old word that's hard to kind of find the definition for. But what they're saying here, a very dated word, it means anger and disgust. This guy was, pissed, for lack of better words to use here. He was not happy when he was saying this. He was like disgusted. If there is a God, certainly hasn't done anything for me. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I've known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, with a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. I mean, this is just poetry. The barriers he'd built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He'd stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. That's just a beautiful moment. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude has shaken it. Now, you, like me, may have never heard the word vicissitude. It means unwelcome or unpleasant change in circumstances or fortune. So his alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago. It disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker, and then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, like myself. And it says, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. This is just such an amazing chapter. I hope that you've gotten a lot out of it. I love it. Every time I read it, I get a lot out of it. It's just, in closing with all this, for this chapter, don't let the word God or creator or him or the source or what are some of the other things that they're saying. Call it whatever you want. It does not matter. It's just, if you got 75 different names for a football, pigskin or this, or it doesn't matter. It's all talking about the same concept. Just go for it. Just give this thing a shot. And just ask yourself, that's step 2. Either God is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Now, if you can say yes, then that's it. That's all step 2 is. You don't have to have a complete understanding. No one does. No one has a total understanding of God. It's just not possible. So if they, they might have a conception, but it doesn't mean they have it figured out. Do you know? So don't be afraid, and don't feel like you have to have it all figured out to give it a try. Just give it a try, and then you will figure some things out. This whole thing is about hope. This whole step 2 is about hope. To know that even in those strange mental blank spots where you shouldn't drink, you're not going to, you say you've made all the promises, all this stuff, and then you still somehow wind up drinking again. You still find yourself drunk in rapid succession, drinking, pounding on the table, all that stuff. Maybe waking up with a hangover. You might just, that. This is why we do step 2. We've got to have this higher power. Even if you don't believe in him, that's fine. I didn't believe in God when I started doing this. I just went through the motions. I trusted my sponsor. My sponsor, Hal, was a physician, and I trusted him. And if he said that God had helped him stay sober, then I believe that it could work for me too. So just give it a shot. God either is or he isn't. What is your choice to be? If you're going with yes, then we'll be moving on into chapter 5, which is how it works. So that's probably the one, if you've been to a meeting, you've heard them read it a whole lot of times. It's got all the steps on one page. In addition, we go through steps 3 and 4 and how it works. And so there will be a whole heck of a lot of content in how it works. So I'm excited to go through it with you. I really hope this has helped out. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm probably not going to be able to get back to you too quickly because I kind of forget to check that email account. But again, get a sponsor, go to meetings, ask around. In the meantime, I'm so happy that you're here. God bless you, and I hope that you have a beautiful day or evening wherever you're at. Until next time.